By 1989, a company that had literally designed the floor plan of American retail was being carved up and sold off in pieces, not by a competitor, not by a recession, but by the very financial machinery that was supposed to save it. Allied Stores had invented the shopping mall experience. It died inside one. To understand what was lost, you have to go back to the beginning. Allied Stores Corporation was formed in 1929, right at the edge of the Great Depression, through the merger of several regional department store chains. Most businesses born in that moment collapsed. Allied survived, and more than survived. It grew. Over the following decades, it assembled a portfolio of some of the most recognizable retail names in America: Jordan Marsh in Boston, Stearns in New York, the Bon Marché in Seattle, Kane Sloan in Nashville. These were not just stores, they were institutions. But Allied's deeper contribution to American life was architectural. Allied's leadership was among the first in retail to understand what the post-war suburban migration actually meant, that millions of families were leaving city centers and would need a new kind of commerce built around the car and the cul-de-sac. Allied partnered with developers and helped anchor some of the earliest enclosed shopping malls in the country. The company didn't just occupy the mall. In a meaningful sense, it helped create the template. For decades, the model worked beautifully. Department stores like the ones Allied ran were the anchor tenants that gave a mall its gravity. They drew the foot traffic that justified every smaller retailer in between. Allied collected rent on that cultural authority, and for a long time, it was a remarkably stable business. By the early 1980s, the company was operating dozens of department stores across the United States and Canada, generating billions in annual revenue. It looked, from the outside, essentially invincible. What it actually was a target. The 1980s leveraged buyout era had a very specific appetite. It looked for companies with strong, under-leveraged real estate, recognizable brand assets, and management that hadn't yet been squeezed. Allied checked every one of those boxes. Its real estate holdings alone were worth enormous sums. Its brands carried decades of customer loyalty, and its balance sheet was relatively clean. To a corporate raider, that wasn't a sign of health. It was an invitation. The move came in 1986. Robert Campeau, a Canadian real estate developer with ambition that significantly outran his retail experience, launched a hostile takeover bid for Allied Stores. The numbers involved were staggering. Campeau ultimately paid approximately $3.6 billion for a company that many analysts believed was worth considerably less at that price. The deal was financed almost entirely with debt. The assumption was that Campeau could sell off parts of Allied quickly enough to service the loans before the interest compounded into something unmanageable. That assumption was wrong. Verify acquisition price and financing structure before publish. Campeau began selling Allied's divisions almost immediately after the acquisition closed. Ann Taylor went. Brooks Brothers went. Merchandising units that had taken Allied decades to build were auctioned in months. The logic was debt reduction, and the logic was not irrational, but the pace was brutal, and the prices Campeau accepted were often below what a patient seller might have achieved. The businesses were not being strategically pruned. They were being liquidated under pressure from lenders who were watching the interest clock tick. And then, before the dust from Allied had even settled, Campeau did it again. In 1988, he acquired Federated Department Stores, another giant, another leveraged deal, even larger than Allied. The combined debt load across both acquisitions was somewhere in the range of $11 billion. Verify combined debt figure before publish. Retail is a thin-margin business at the best of times. Servicing that kind of debt while also running stores, managing inventory, and paying staff was not a strategy. It was a structural impossibility. The end came with remarkable speed. In January 1990, Campeau's retail empire filed for bankruptcy protection, at the time, one of the largest retail bankruptcies in American history. The irony that sits at the center of this story is almost architectural in its neatness. Allied Stores had spent 60 years helping to build the physical infrastructure of American consumer culture. It had planted department stores at the hearts of malls from the Pacific Northwest to the Eastern Seaboard. And it was destroyed not by consumers, not by competition, but by a financing structure that was never designed to survive contact with reality. The stores themselves, many of them, survived under new ownership, absorbed into Macy's and other acquiring entities over the years that followed. The Bon Marché became Macy's. Jordan Marsh became Macy's. The names dissolved, but the locations endured, which is perhaps the most fitting coda. Allied's real legacy was never the corporate entity. It was the physical space, the anchor position, the mall corner, the atrium with the escalator. Those outlasted the company by decades. The architecture survived. The business that built it did not. What Allied Stores teaches, ultimately, is not about retail at all. It is about the difference between asset value and business value, and how the distance between those two numbers can become a weapon. Allied's real estate was real. Its brands were real. But a business is not just its assets. It is the operating logic that connects them. The relationships, the positioning, the margin, the time. Campeau bought the assets. He destroyed the operating logic. And without that, even the most beautifully designed store is just an empty room.